Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. Hopefully you will recognize the wonderful Kat Ellinger from the last time she was on the channel. Kat, thank you for coming back.
No, I'm glad to be back.
The last time we were on, the on-camera talk was wonderful, and I'm not going to put that down in any way, but afterwards, we had this really cool moment of just understanding that both of us came from a place of understanding, essentially, through the lens of neurodiversity, which is not something that
Yes.
gets spoken about in this hobby, in this field, in this general area. So first of all, can you give a short what you view as neurodiversity for everybody?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. So I could talk about my own relationship with it, which is
Yeah.
probably makes more sense to me. So I'd never heard of neurodiversity until 5 years ago when I got diagnosed with ADHD. And after my diagnosis, and I talked about this recently on my own podcast, I don't know, I was just kind of devastated. I didn't want to feel like I was disabled. And I realize now that was just my internalized ableism
Right.
and just, but I just didn't want to accept it. And I stumbled into neurodiversity, it's been around for a while, but it's only like the last several years that it's appearing on social media. You're seeing videos about it and people talking about it. But neurodiversity basically argues that things like autism and ADHD, and sometimes they even put bipolar in with this. I've seen bipolar included in that, are essentially just a different operating system. And so that
Right.
disability is caused much more by environment. We live in what they call the neurotypical world. So that's the people who are not neurodiverse. And it is organized in a certain way that it's not really good for the certain challenges that we have with things like executive functioning or focusing or all of that stuff. And so it's like an advocacy movement to not just normalize these different operating systems, but also, I guess, like a disability movement to advocate for the rights of people like us. And even things like changing the workplace, changing how we think about neurodiversity. And that just changed my life, because it was the first time that I'd seen ADHD and autism talked about in a positive way,
Right.
because it's not just about the challenges, it's also about the strengths of having ADHD and autism. And so it is a really important movement in that way. And even neurodiversity, we didn't hear that word in mainstream like 5 years ago.
Not at
I
all.
stumbled by it completely by accident. Now I see there's a lot more on it, but then I was just like, what is this? I've never heard of this. It's kind of a short answer.
And one of the things that you touched on there is one of the biggest things that I've tried to use to approach everything that I've done over the last handful of years, because I'm a supervisor in the workforce that I'm in, and I try to frame everything through this lens of accessibility. And in
Yeah.
terms of the different way people learn, in terms of the different way that people process information, and uh, this is kind of a negative word to associate with it, but exploiting their strengths in a good way, you really have to allow them to grow and impact things that they can in their own way, because people are all diverse, and that is
Yeah.
at the exact central of neurodiversity.
And
Um,
that's what I love about it, because it's like, we often talk in terms of normal and not normal, and obviously ADHD and ASD are classed as disorders, and I'm not entirely comfortable with them being classed as
right.
disorders. And it is a kickback to that. It's all about, recognizing we are diverse, we are different, even our brains are different. And so, I might excel in a certain environment, whereas a neurotypical person wouldn't, and vice versa. So I really love that emphasis on how we're all different and how we all need these individual supports. Because even other people with ADHD are different. Like, so I know so many people with ADHD now, and all of them have different parts to it. It's a
Oh yeah.
spectrum disorder. And with me, it's mainly executive functioning, whereas some people are more hyperactive, some people are more have memory issues. It's completely different for all of us. So putting that like tag on as a disorder, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. And I realize now that my initial reaction to my own diagnosis, that wasn't me. That didn't come from me. That came from ideas that I'd been fed from, the outside. Like, this is what ADHD is. And so the last 5 years have been a journey to learn about it. And I realized that everything I knew about it was wrong. And, part of that is to do with neurodiversity and the movement and people talking about it more, knowing that there's no shame. When I was first diagnosed, my own kids have got it, and I never felt ashamed for them. And I was always an advocate for them.
Yeah.
But telling people myself, I remember the first time I ever posted about it, I felt sick, like I outed myself. And now I talk about it all the time. I've got a podcast on it, and it's like, yeah, but 5 years ago I was just felt awful. But I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to tell people. I'm just going to tell people, and they can deal with it or not. It's their problem if they don't want to deal with it.
And that's how we strengthen the accessibility. And my side of that, I just got diagnosed not even 6 full months ago yet with having ADHD, and I am still learning all kinds of various aspects of it, considering it's only 6 months old. And I feel like this baby neurodiverse person that is really just taking some of those first steps. But the hardest part for me is the only reason that I even sought out diagnosis is because I have 2 kids, and both of my kids have been diagnosed with autism. My oldest child has been diagnosed with ADHD, and learning about how much my oldest child is a spitting image exact frame of me from that age. It was just looking back and going, damn it, I probably have a form of autism and ADHD. And what is there something that I can do to frame that for myself now that will actually benefit me? And, I look at him as being positive, so I need to look at me as having it be a positive aspect of my life as well.
Yeah, it's hard. I was oblivious. Somebody told me, somebody else with ADHD just suggested it to me. Have you ever considered that? And even though, like, my kids are also, they're either on the autism spectrum or have a diagnosis of ADHD, or have 2 that are combined.
Yeah.
They have both. And it's all on my dad's side of the family. But my dad would just be like, oh, yeah, you're really like me. You start things that you don't finish. So it's just like, yeah. And it's so genetic, but they still don't understand why. And it just goes back to this fact that we're different. Our brains are just different.
Yep.
And I always tried to frame it that way for my kids, but it's weird that I never had that reaction myself. I was just like, oh my God, it's never going to get better. That was my first reaction.
Right.
But then I was like, okay, what do I do about this? And yeah, I think it's brilliant. And I find so many people in the quote unquote film community, whether they know it or not, are neurodiverse. And a few of my friends in that community have since been either diagnosed with autism or ADHD because of me prattling on about it constantly on social media. But it's all about that awareness. That's why we need that awareness. And then they start thinking, hang on a minute, I think I've got that.
Right.
So it's a wonderful thing, I think, once you start talking about it openly, that other people, and it's all around film. The people I work with, the people I'm friends with, I don't know what it is about film that attracts neurodiverse people. Maybe it's like the visual sensory element to it and the emotional aspect. There's something about it that, I rarely meet neurotypical people within this scene, like whether they're aware or not. And in fact, I made this post the other day about how I think sometimes what would it be like to be neurotypical? And it would probably be like Kim in Saw when she has to go off to the sprinklers place. It was quite funny. Quite a few of my friends who I've always thought of as very neurodiverse, they were like, well, I'm neurotypical. It's like, no, you're not. Like, no, you're
Are you sure?
not.
So
yeah.
we bring up film, and that is the perfect time to really start talking about what we were going to look at today, and that is the depictions of neurodiversity in film. And really, when you start to think about it, because they're trying to reach the most broad spectrum of viewers, doing this from a neurotypical lens, it sort of makes sense to try to do it in a neurotypical fashion. However, because so many people are neurodiverse, you would think that there would be at least more accurate depictions of those types of characters in film.
Yeah, it's a weird one, and there's also a lot of filmmakers that were definitely
Right.
neurodiverse, and just recently, actually, Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed with autism and talks about it, which I was just like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But and you think a lot of actors and people, you hear about them, and you just think they're obviously, but I mean, Stanley Kubrick, I think, was the most autistic
Oh
filmmaker
yeah.
who ever existed. Like his obsessions, his attention to detail. So it's interesting that you rarely see neurodiverse people. Well, you've got the stereotype of Bart Simpson, and we all love Bart Simpson, don't we? But he's like the poster child for ADHD, just needs a
Right.
slap around the head. He's not helpful as a, you know, I guess a poster boy and an icon for us, because in fact a lot of us aren't even physically hyperactive.
Right.
And I always though identified more with Homer. Homer is definitely adult ADHD. He's got to that
100%.
stage where he's kind of worn out a bit and he's a bit confused. And, I am more Homer. And so he's like I guess, a more of a complex neurodiverse person. But when you asked me, should we do something on this? I was just thinking, where are they? Like, where are the, where
Right.
Kim Wexler is definitely on the spectrum. And my theory is Saul is ADHD. So, because he has that no cause and effect thing. He's very impulsive, but he's also a big problem solver and he's got all
Oh
this
yeah.
energy. And she is very sort of logical in that. So, and I've seen other people, I've seen memes going round about Kim as well from the neurodiversity community. So, I think, well, maybe there is something in it. And yeah, but like, where are they? It's bizarre. It's something that you don't see a lot in film. You don't see talked about. You don't see talked about in television. I think the only ADHD programs I've ever seen have been on like the exploitation of big pharma, or
Yeah.
these like not really about any of this other stuff. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
It really is. And with ADHD, there's so many different ways that you could frame it. I mean, one of the things that you just brought up, I think you said your dad said it to you, is that you start so many projects that we don't finish. And with ADHD, it even just that aspect is diverse across the spectrum, because some people, they start, they'll start 10 hobbies in a year and go all in on those
Yeah.
hobbies, and after 2 weeks be completely burned out. But then the other side of the spectrum, you have people that will do nothing for work projects or home projects, and then the very last day they'll somehow knock everything out perfectly, and just because of that, it is quite obviously an ADHD symptom that procrastination drove them
Mm.
to this amazing product at the end of it, essentially. And that's hard to film, and I get that, but so many people live in this realm that it should be something that we see represented.
Yeah, it's a shame. There are certain characters. I always thought that Madame Bovary as a character had ADHD.
Yeah.
And I did actually, when I did the Arrow commentary, talked a little bit about neurodiversity. And then I was kind of like, most people are going to think I'm nuts and not know what I'm on about. But she's like perfectly ADHD. She's bored, she's restless. She doesn't like her environment. She requires a lot of intellectual stimulation and romantic stimulation. And of course, she's punished for that. But she seems like perfectly ADHD to me. And yeah, it's interesting. So I did bring that up. I do see more neurodiversity in filmmakers' methods. So two in particular, Gaspar Noé. And I know that he talks a lot about how he's done drugs in the past and he's always trying to alter his consciousness. But Lux Eterna, where he uses a split screen and there's all this talking, that is my ADHD sensory overload. I want a clip of that film to send to people to say, look, if I'm if I'm too overloaded, this is me right now. And just certain things in his films, the way he uses these sensory elements, sorts of
Yeah.
spinning, and so Noé is definitely one. I don't know whether he's neurodiverse himself or a lot of people put it down to the fact that he's experimented with drugs and things, but I don't know. I think it's more than that. And the other one is Peter Strickland. And, Peter Strickland's world is very close to the world that I live in as an ADHD person. I call it a liminal space. It's not being quite here, it's in some other place in between dreams and reality, which is why I'm attracted to a lot of surreal film. It doesn't need
Yes.
to make logical sense to me. It makes complete emotional sense to me as a neurodiverse person. And Strickland is just so in that. He's so in that. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if he's neurodiverse, but his films are incredibly neurodiverse, even if the characters aren't. But then you do get these characters in Peter Strickland films who have these little obsessions and these little quirks. So I don't know, maybe. But no one that really massively stands out to me. I don't know.
The one thing that it always bothers me is that when you bring up autism, everybody seems to go to the movie Rain Man.
Oh my
And
God. And that is the literal worst. When
right.
I was trying to get my youngest diagnosed, we have a lot of gatekeeping in the UK. So it was like a whole thing because we just couldn't see anyone. It was just a whole thing that went on years. And they sent us to a so-called mental health professional who was just another person to try and put us off pursuing diagnosis. And she said to me, well, he can't be autistic because he can talk. And my answer was, it's not bloody Rain Man. Like, what?
Right.
People with autism can have a sense of humor. They have feelings. They care about people.
Yeah.
They can be affectionate. Some of my autistic friends and my kids are the funniest people I've ever known. But yet there's this weird, enduring stereotype of the autistic person is like a complete genius who never speaks unless they're pouring out mathematical formula and they don't care about anyone. And that is absolutely wrong. That's nothing to do with autism. And yeah, I'm sorry to the film. I know it's like a big breakthrough. I fucking hate it. Sorry.
Yeah, same.
I find it really insulting. I find it as insulting as Forrest Gump, which is
yes,
that film makes me so angry.
We went to a doctor to have my youngest child evaluated after the oldest had been diagnosed, and they told us that without even attempting to evaluate him, we've been with him for a good 5 or 8 minutes, and there's no way he's autistic. He looks us in the eyes. That's
and
just a tiny portion.
There is such a thing called masking as well,
right?
Which is
yeah.
So autistic people and ADHD people often mask as neurotypical. Because
when it comes to kids and parenting, that will see a huge spectrum, as you and I can attest to, obviously. I mean, kids can be very different from the same family.
Yeah, and all of my neurodiverse kids are all different. Like, their symptoms are different. Again, I don't even like calling them symptoms, but what else do you call them?
Right.
But the facets of their neurodiversity is completely different. And again, when my eldest was diagnosed with what they called Asperger's syndrome then, but now it's autism spectrum disorder. I'd always known that there was something, but there was again, because people thought autism was this more extreme thing. And when he was diagnosed with Asperger's, it was totally mind-blowing to me that, he was 16 and for 16 years, no one had actually known what it was. Yeah. And then when one of my younger sons, I thought, well, he can't be autistic because he's not like his brother. But it turns out he's also on the spectrum, but his autism presents in an entirely different way.
Right.
Whereas my eldest has a lot of sensory overload and he's not very touchy. The younger one is very physically affectionate. So, again, it's all about learning this stuff, which I learned, because it's not publicized anywhere. I've had to obviously probably the same for you. I had to get educated myself.
Yeah. And the hard part, we don't have the true representation in a lot of this. So when we see it at home, it's something that you view as, Well, are other people just fighting this and it's just feels more difficult for me? Is this something that other families are going through? When you've heard autism or ADHD discussed before, it's not discussed in that spectrum view. So it's really discussed as a couple traits that will set people different from the rest of the neurotypicals, but you don't even understand if your situation is real because you're buried in it. And I think one of the situations that you and I have talked about before, that one of the only films that I've seen it portrayed in a good way is in the Babadook. That movie, it shows a
Yeah.
child that is just under the absolute stress of who knows what, because it's not like we hear an actual diagnosis in the film, but the way that he acts is so true to life for a lot of families. And for this woman to be facing it alone through the grief of losing a spouse, it is such a like an empathetic view that I have to watch that view from now, because I'm lost in that because of what my wife and I face every single day when it comes to kids.
It's amazing, and I hadn't had my diagnosis when that came out, obviously, but I just totally fell in love with the film. And for these reasons, the when she's trying to deal with this son who's having like a total meltdown, it's like I've lived that as a
Yeah.
single parent, and the surveillance and the judgment and just the sheer fucking exhaustion as well. I love
Yeah.
that scene where she's trying to masturbate 'cause she's just so fed up, like she wants a stress release, and the kid comes in,
Yeah.
and it's just like, oh, for God's sake, just and I saw people respond to that. People obviously say there's the grief element and this and that, but people sort of saying, "Oh, she's not a very nice mum," and just take it in this. And I thought she was an absolute hero in that film.
Yeah.
And so even though I didn't fully understand it because I hadn't started thinking about it so much in the terms that I understand now, just on an instinctual level, I was like, "My God, this film is incredible."
Yeah.
And it does talk about what you're dealing with, what you're dealing with in the home, how it is to bring up with kids on the so-called special educational needs, and a lot of that stress is external as well, like trying to keep down the job. The kid doesn't fit in at school and he's getting sent home, and
Yeah.
people are like, your kid did this thing, like all the time, all those external pressures. And it's an incredible film. And I've not even seen it. I did liner notes for it, and I kind of wanted to go there, but I didn't. I chickened out a bit. I did more about motherhood. Yeah, I wasn't as secure in my neurodiversity then, but I kind of wanted to go that way and didn't. So yeah.
I've been unhappy with the response to that film, and not because everybody should enjoy the same film as me, but so many people are showing how just clueless they are about,
Mm.
first of all, parenting, but second of all, just the way that we are diverse people in that realm. Behavioral issues for children, they manifest in a variety of different ways, and so many respond to that movie by just saying, "God, that kid was fucking awful. He was annoying the entire time." I'm
Yeah, the horrible, awful kid and the horrible, awful mum, and that's not how I saw it.
right.
I didn't see that kid was awful, and I didn't think the mother was awful. I thought they were having a really tough time of it with literally no support from anyone. And you're right, there are like a lot of ignorant responses to that film. I think it just went completely over certain people's heads. But then again, we don't hear this stuff discussed like ever. As a parent, and I talked about this on my podcast because I felt inspired to talk about it, because I saw this woman in an ADHD group who she wrote this screed. It was just berating herself for being a terrible parent. And I spoke directly to her, but then I thought I need to talk about this because when my kids were growing up, and my eldest is like 30 now, I had him at 17 because ADHD. And, you know, um, but apart from my youngest, who's 16, the rest are all in their late 20s. And so I was like a 17-year-old with undiagnosed ADHD with 4 kids by the age of 25 and 5 by the age of 31. Not really understanding, a lot about my own kids, and they were in the process of getting diagnosed and nobody knew much about it. And you know, and I didn't know about my own issues. And when I look back on that now, I think it's an absolute miracle because they all turned out amazing people. And I got a graduate degree and I managed to keep down jobs and whatever. But at the time, all I felt was like, I'm a terrible parent. I can't keep my house clean. Look at all those other people. How do they do that? How do they get their kids to school on time and dressed properly? So I just thought in those terms that I'm a terrible person. And seeing the Babadook and seeing what's her name? It's not, I can never remember her name. She's always different in everything she's in, but the woman who plays the lead, the mother, seeing what she was going through and seeing how she had those same feelings.
Right.
I don't know much about the history of that film or why it was written, but that really resonated with me as well. Like, this is somebody who knows what it's like to be in that situation, and yet we never talk about it. No one wants to admit that they think they're a shitty parent, and all I did at the time was I hid it. I hid it from people. I felt terrible all the time. When I look back now, none of that bloody mattered. You know, the house was a mess. So what? The kids don't remember that. They remember that we sat up till 1 a.m. playing Tomb Raider, which probably isn't the most responsible thing to have done, but that's what they remember. They remember that I always had time for them and always, you know, whatever obsession they had in the moment, I was totally into it too. That's what they remember. They don't remember, oh, Mum forgot to do the washing, so we had to go to the laundrette all day to do 15 loads of that. Even that they thought was fun. So it's to see it in a film, in a horror film, is crazy. You know, the way she's just hanging on by a thread and doesn't, you know, she's trying to keep it together.
Right.
And she's also got this grief to deal with, and she feels very judged by people around her, but she hides it. She goes into the house. I mean, it's more of a, I guess it's more extreme. It's like this more extreme version of it, but she cuts herself off. She, you know, her own sister, there's all that crap with her sister's always judging her.
Yep.
And I just thought, this is someone who knows. This is someone who's been through this or just kind of gets it. And like you said, I can't see that anywhere else. I don't see that anywhere else. I don't even see programs where it's like a whole family of like 8 people. Not a single one of them is neurodiverse. That does not reflect real life. Not at all.
The Babadook got one more thing right for me that I really wanted to highlight, and that is how often we hear, especially my generation and older, we heard the old creed of it takes a village to raise a child. And with a film like The Babadook, you lose your entire village when you have a situation like that. And first of all, grief alone will do that to a lot of people because they'll start to isolate themselves. But if you add behavioral issues with a child that is going through, you know, some sort of neurodiversity pains and that part of life, people will start to isolate from that family as well. So even if you have a close sister like she did in this, the amount of times that she's willing to volunteer will diminish over time. And so this mother is not only feeling stuck in a situation where she's raising a child by herself, she can't even feel the freedom to ask for help from anybody because, one, you can't trust many people with your children when they're being like that, and two, the people that you can are already drawing themselves back. So like my wife and I, we live in the middle of the country here in the US, and we have a couple family members here, but none of them volunteer to assist anymore.
I never got babysitters.
Nope. So
never.
because of that,
not even my
stuck.
own mother. I get it. No one wants to take it on, and it's like, no one would want to take my kids on. So it's like, okay, fine, just don't bother then. The sister one really got to me in that because it was so. There's this birthday party scene. It was like, don't bring my kid to you. Don't bring that kid to my house anymore, sort of thing. You know, your kid did this, and just people's reaction to it, almost as if, it might be catching. And again, I think that is largely to do with misunderstanding. And if we had more, if we talked more about it in general media, there would be more of an understanding. You know, I know with my youngest, his autistic meltdowns were largely to do with frustration, with fear, was a lot of stuff around going to school, so he was homeschooled for years because it was too stressful for him, but he couldn't put that into words. So taken on face value, he just looked like he was being a little brat having a temper tantrum, but it wasn't actually. It was an extreme emotional reaction to stress, and understanding that and understanding how to deal with an autistic meltdown was really helpful. Again, that was something I randomly found on the internet because no doctor told me,
Right.
it's a meltdown and this is how you deal with it. Yeah, so why do we not have that? I don't know. There is Wish You Were Here, which I sent you a copy of it. And I was a teenager when that film came out. Was it 1987? You got Emily Lloyd, who plays this wayward teenage girl. It's actually based on Cynthia Payne. I don't know if you know who she is, but they did the Personal Services was the later film about her later life where she became this very famous brothel madam.
I need to look that one up now because I really
Very
enjoyed this
good.
movie.
It's got Julie Walters in it. Oh, it's just amazing. And I remember with all the scandal around her, because she was servicing these very high profile judges and politicians, and the film is a blast. And it talks about her early life growing up post-war. She gets pregnant. She's very promiscuous. She has no boundaries. And that character to me felt like me as a teenager. Like, looking back on her now, I would read it through an ADHD lens, that she was ADHD. There's certain things in there like impulsivity. She can never keep her mouth shut. She's always swearing at people. She's got this like defiance, and she's very strong-willed. She really knows what she wants. But as a teenager, that film to me was everything, because I saw myself in that film. And that was incredible. But again, it's never been discussed in those terms. I don't know if Cynthia Payne was neurodiverse, but she certainly led a very interesting life. She did lead a neurotypical life. That much I know.
Right.
And yeah, so I don't know, maybe there's something in there, but you're right. They should actually label it. They should actually say this is a film about, we have so many films about mental illness, but nothing about neurodiversity.
Well, and on the hopeful side, I mean, in the times of Cynthia Payne and even in the times I Wish You Were Here, this neurodiversity was not a common term. Even autism wasn't used as a common term properly. So
No.
now that we have the younger generation starting to create film, who knows? Maybe there is an era of representation that is coming, because now it's more commonplace, more talked about. It's more of a realistic thing that is tangible for a lot of people because there are labels. I'm a little bit younger than you, but even growing up in the 80s and 90s, I was most likely ADHD and autistic, and I still remember being called shy. And so many parents just, she's shy or whatever to explain away the behaviors of a child, but they probably needed some assistance. They probably needed something to get them through, but nobody, discussed it in that lens. Nobody discussed film in that lens. And now, hey, maybe there's some labels coming in the future.
I'd like to see that. I would really like to see that. There has been this backlash, I guess, by older people who think that ADHD is just an excuse to excuse naughty kids. I wasn't actually a naughty kid.
Same.
I was a very dreamy, sort of weird kid. My hyperactivity didn't kick in till puberty, which is apparently quite normal for girls, and which is why a lot of girls misdiagnosis. But I started getting into trouble a lot at school, and so no one knew what ADHD was then. And I started acting like kind of impulsively in my teens, and nobody ever thought maybe it's neurological.
Right.
They would put me through this thing like, oh, it's this, she's in with a bad crowd, or heavy metal's making her do this, or these ridiculous things. But even in the 90s with my oldest, people didn't know. They would say the shy thing to him. And I used to say to his teachers, because they were always trying to force him to be social, like, we're putting him in these social things, so he's not social enough. I kept saying, but I don't think he likes being social. Well, no, you have to be social. But he's actually comfortable, like he's happy. why are you doing these interventions? He's like, oh no, he has to be social, but he's happy.
Yeah,
And
it's
they thought
training
it was
kids to mask.
shyness. Yeah, and my son never masked. He was lucky enough, and he never had to mask at home. But yeah, this again, with this lack of representation in media, or very extreme forms of autism, like the Rain Man thing. I think we get this backlash now where people are like, oh, that's just a made up thing because all these
Right.
perfectly functioning people can't have this thing. And it's like, well, one, we're not actually perfectly functional. We might be high functioning, but there's a lot of stuff you don't see.
Yep.
And the other thing is, it's not these extreme things. There are levels of it. But you do oh, it's attention seeking, or it's like, and that really pisses me off. It doesn't really exist. And it's like, no, these things actually exist. They can brain scan you and
Yep.
see them on a brain scan. And they're like, oh, no, it's because people eat too much sugar. It's because one woman told me my son's behavior was because he played too many video games. What the hell are you on about?
Yeah.
It's like, you can't become autistic by playing Call of Duty. I'm sorry. Do you think these are the people who are in charge? It's like, we
Right.
don't have much of a hope, snowball's chance in hell, really.
And they're
And
making choices about our medical benefits.
yeah, I know. It's just like, well, that's helpful, isn't it? Yeah, okay, we'll just take the video games away and then he'll have a meltdown. It's like...
Exactly. I was never super poor behavior or anything like that either. One of the ways that my ADHD really harms me, I think, is because I overanalyze everything before I make any big decisions. So growing
same.
up, I was stuck in situations where I should have decided weeks prior to making a big decision, and I would tear apart every single scenario. So it looked like I made a lot of great decisions, but that's only because I've analyzed it so that it was impossible to fail.
Yeah. It was weird for me. I was thinking about what you said about the Babadook kid, and he imagines this thing and you don't know if it's real or
Right.
not. But one of the big, and this actually, I hadn't thought about this before. As a kid, I was like really sensitive, and I did live in this sort of in between where, I'm still like it now, but half of my life was about fantasy. So I was that was what drew me to horror films, because I was very sensitive to this concept of ghosts. I thought there were ghosts in our house. I watched like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and I thought my neighbors had been taken over.
Yeah.
And there was like no sort of line, no boundary between reality and fantasy. And it's interesting you said that about the Babadook kid, because he is like, in that, very much in that space where, it could just be the suggestible mind. Again, no one picked up on that. No one picked up
Right.
on the fact that, I mean, the kids picked up on it. They thought I was a weirdo. Amongst theories that the guy who lived in our old house had killed his wife and buried her. He was dead and was haunting the house. I was obsessed with the notion of nuclear war because I watched Threads, and when I was 10, I bought these bunkers, and I would lecture the kids on like blast zones and stuff. No one wanted to hang out with me. They're just like, these fucking weird kids.
I love that. What's funny though is that sort of thing, that type of neurodiversity kind of lends itself to horror perfectly, because our reaction to certain situations, it causes increased tension. It causes
Yeah.
this extreme anxiety. It causes this social isolation that is terrifying. And not only to the people that are in the situation, which it is, but the people witnessing that situation look at them as off-putting or scary as well. So I'm shocked we don't get more related to that, where they're talking about these sorts of traits in people.
Yeah, there is, like I said, there's a lot of neurodiverse people around horror film,
Yeah.
and probably a lot of neurodiverse people that have made horror film. But horror film, to me, it always felt like home. It felt like the familiar, because I
Yep.
lived in that, was my default state.
Yeah.
This sort of semi-nightmarish, anxiety-fueled world, and that is where I saw people that I identified with, people in the same state. So horror to me largely felt like a comfort. I mean, there are certain horror films that did scare me, not many though. The Shining, The Exorcist, and Ringu are probably the only three films that really scared me outside of Dracula Prince of Darkness when I was 6, and that did terrify me. But mainly it was I felt identification in horror.
Same.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of horror fans talk about this, how they felt like an outsider, or they responded to it in that way. I wasn't scared of the vampires. I wanted to be a vampire, especially the living at night thing, because my ADHD causes a sleep disorder. and so I've always had, it's not actually insomnia, but I've always had like a delayed sleep phase. And I was like, this would be perfect for me. Never get old, never die. You can live at night.
One of my favorite aspects of watching horror is for the empathy factor, because feeling the anxiety and the dread that they feel in these situations, I feel that almost every single day. So watching these, it feels like a validating thing for me, knowing that other people feel these same emotions.
And I know Kayla Janice wrote about that, not from a neurodiverse perspective, but from a mental health perspective. That was like the entire thesis of House of Psychotic Women, which was a groundbreaking book, and obviously that's just been republished again, and we've got the Severin box set with a selection of films. But that was the first time that somebody actually started saying, I have mental health problems, and this is my relationship with horror film, with exploitation film. And I don't actually find these films offensive or scary. To me, they are comfort, and this is why. And so Kayla's work is so important, so important in that field, because it starts to open the door a little bit. And I've done a little bit around neurodiversity on my Patreon, but I'd like to do more, because I think it does affect your relationship with film. You definitely watch film in a very different way. Even as a film critic, a lot of film critics around me tend to be more about, I'm very cerebral and here is my thesis and blah, blah, blah. And it's all about that. And it's very cold. And I've had some sort of negativity from peers who think that I am too emotional about film. Like, one of the criticisms I've had is I'm too enthusiastic on commentaries. It's like, I'm watching a film I really love. I'm not going to do a commentary on something I don't like. And, I'm watching it with obviously fans of that film, but that one ticks them off. And I did a whole video on it because I started to think, but this is how I connect to film. I'm less likely to, unless I've seen a film millions of times, and then I'll obsess over every line of dialogue. And I'm that person who says the line before it comes out. On that. But generally, my takeaway from films isn't details or even like these little minutiae that people tend to focus on, or plot points. It's how I felt. That's what I take away from a film. And then when I go back to write about something, or I go back to podcast about something, I always have to go and watch it again just to double check, because all I'll be left with is a feeling. Because that is how I connect to film, first and foremost. It is a very emotional, unspoken, almost wordless, which sounds stupid if you're a film critic, say it's wordless. But it is wordless because it's somewhere else. And in Bergman's autobiography talks about this. Bergman was definitely very neurodiverse, and I adore him. And again, you see Hour of the Wolf. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's all about anxiety and depression. And it is just a fucking masterpiece, but it's also the closest he gets to horror. And he did Persona as well. But he talks in his book, because people have made like Bergman this intellectual monolith, and they write these big like wordy essays about him, and they're very, oh, look at me, I'm very clever. But Bergman was not into that. Bergman said the film was like a gateway into the soul, and it was beyond language. He wanted to connect to people on this more spiritual level. And that to me seemed like the most neurodiverse thing ever to say. and he obviously had problems, I guess, communicating with, but like he was problematic
Right.
that way. And then he went off and lived on that island at the end with all his video collection. And I love that documentary. He did like Bergman's Island or whatever it was, where he's just living on this island, pottering around, talking about his demons, which he'd given names to, which were obviously his different anxieties. And I just thought, that is the life. Now I want my own island. And he's like, I only see my cleaner every 3 days. Don't really like people. And it's like, that is a man who's totally curated a neurodiverse life for himself.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, with neurodiversity, again, just the different ways it affects people. One of the things that I wanted to look at this with, other than Essie Davis, by the way, that was the name of the mother from the
Essie
Babadook.
Davis, that's it. She's also in that amazing 20s murder mystery thing, Australian thing.
Yeah.
Which I really like and can't remember the name of because ADHD. See?
I can look that up as I'm talking about this next part.
This is me. Like any podcast I do, I've normally got strict notes because otherwise it's like, what was that guy? You know, the one.
I don't even remember what year it was at this point. Anyways, the way that we approach these, it should lead to this idea of accessibility that I brought up earlier, because not only through neurodiversity, but even things like Mike Flanagan's Hush, it was made more interesting because the main character was deaf and she couldn't hear, which led to an actual plot point, which brought up the dread, which brought up the actual terror and anxiety in the film. And with that in mind, we should be talking about film in terms of other ways that people experience them, including drawing out emotion, because just sharing plot points, we all witnessed the exact same thing on the screen. We all didn't feel the same thing while watching that movie. So the way that these filmmakers are able to draw something out of us is maybe the most powerful aspect of it. Now, there are certain films where it's literally just watch the atrocities of war and realize we shouldn't do this in the future. However, a lot of these movies that we all know and love, it can genuinely be about care for these characters in your experience and what you can draw out of yourself as a person. And with more representation, the only thing that can come from that truly is like positive embracing those around us.
I think there is this thing though in talking about film where, like I said, it's kind of poo-pooed. Like talking about how you felt about a film isn't very cool. It's everybody trying to one up each other on, I had this amazing insight about that film. And
Right.
so if you're just purely talking about it in an emotional way, that's seen as lesser. Whereas with me, I want to know how a film made someone feel first, rather than what it's about. I want to know how they felt about it, like, you know, because that's what I understand. And it's not very cool or trendy to do that, to talk about that. You've got to come up with the best fan theory and the best, like, I don't know if that's just a social media thing. It seems more now we've got social media and it's like people you don't even know sticking their nub in, but even, you know, when I was just used to talk to people in the pub about it, you still get that.
Yeah.
That weird thing that where people really want to prove, you know, I got it. And I remember having a really interesting conversation over Louis Malle's Black Moon on a podcast with a guy who just didn't get it because he wanted everything to be logical. And it was really challenging to me because I was trying to convey something to him that I didn't actually have the words for. And I don't think I entirely convinced him, but, you know, Black Moon, Malle wrote that with automatic writing. And it's like a film all about the subconscious. And I love it. And it doesn't need to make sense to me because it makes perfect emotional sense to me. And I was trying to explain it to this guy who was obviously very neurotypical. And he was getting annoyed with me. He was getting like, yeah, but it, and I'm like, but it does. And, you know, it doesn't need to make narrative sense to me because it makes perfect emotional. And he was getting cross with me about it. He just didn't understand me. He just didn't. He was like, yeah, but it's still got to make sense. But it does.
And
I was
that's
like,
why
how do
sharing our
I
experiences is so important.
yeah, like how do I convey this to you? We're not all neurotypical. And a lot of us don't actually need that. Um and talking of accessibility, I don't know if you have this thing, and I've noticed that they do quite a few autistic friendly screenings now at our
Yep.
local multiplex. But I really struggle with hearing films. I have to
Same.
watch them with subtitles.
Every
I
single
find
one.
a lot of neurodiverse people need that. Otherwise, I can't focus on
Yep.
the plot. And newer films are worse because the music is quite often
So
mixed.
loud.
Oh my god, it's just like, what are they saying? I can't hear them, but my hearing's perfect.
Yeah. I'm on this crusade to try to get some of these boutique Blu-ray companies to subtitle all of their special features as well. It really would make the situation so much better if I could watch your visual essay on horror from Imprint that I just watched recently. I would love to be able to embrace every word because it would sink so much lower if I could hear it and read it at the
Yeah.
exact same time.
No, I can definitely, if something's got harder hearing subtitles, I will use them. And
Yeah,
unfortunately, a lot of the time they don't. And then you think, what if I was deaf? I wouldn't even be able to
exactly.
access this stuff. But I struggle so hard. And my son who's on the spectrum, he also needs subtitles to focus on stuff. So things like Netflix, a lot of them do have subtitles, which is helpful. But like you said, there's loads of stuff that doesn't, loads of extra features or just general like old TV or whatever. None of it has subtitles. And I can watch it, but it takes a lot of energy to
Oh, yeah,
focus to hear.
it's tough.
And yeah, and it's not even just a focus issue, it's a sensory issue, because if the music is too loud or there's other things going on, my brain is just like, oh my god, I can't cope with this. Yeah, I can't watch that bloody, what's his name? I can't remember his name, but he's terrible and I know everybody loves him. The guy who did The Dark Knight. The
Christopher Nolan,
dark
they're all
he
terrible.
Oh my god, thank God. I had to go to the cinema to see The Dark Knight, and when I realized there was still another hour and a half to go, I lost the will to live. I was in purgatory in that fucking film. I
Right.
couldn't hear anything anyone was saying, and it was loud and stupid, and I hated it. And then everyone was like, "Oh my god, it was a masterpiece!" And it was like that. I felt like I was being tortured.
Yeah, I actively will choose another movie sometimes if I'm reading the back of the Blu-ray case and it does not have subs listed. I will literally go choose something else because the way I've justified it is it's a visual medium. I'm being expected to focus visually, but then you're also going to ask me to focus audibly? Come on.
Yeah.
I want to be able to focus visually. That's why we're here.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting thing because people often think like ADHD and autism are two separate things, but there's so much crossover, and that sensory thing is one of them. And it definitely influences how you receive film, how you feel about film,
Yeah.
the emotions that it gives you, the actual physical experience of watching a film as well. It's all influenced by that. And there are so many neurodiverse film fans that all have various struggles. I know the subs one comes up a lot. I see there's a meme now, and it's like I can't hear without my subtitles. And I
Yep.
just like, it's actually that common. It's become a meme now. But people don't think that those things affect you. They just think you're hyper.
Right.
I got two gears basically, and none of them involve physically moving. It's either total inertia or lots of typing. But that it's not that. It's weird sensory stuff. It's anxiety, like you said. It's procrastination. I have terrible executive functioning skills. So I've got like 10 diaries. I've got reminders that go off.
Right.
All this stuff, and decision paralysis. There's so many other things about it. Anxiety, which I thought was just a side effect. I realized recently that is an offshoot of ADHD. It's hyper focus, but just in
Yep.
the wrong thing. It's not actually like traditional anxiety. There is like that really good thing, the ADHD iceberg, and it's just got the hyperactivity and that at the top, and then underneath there's like all these other things, and you're just like, whoa. And I don't know, maybe I'll make a film about it. I didn't think about making a documentary about neurodiverse women. I don't know. I don't know. I've talked to my friend who's a cinematographer and director about it, because I'd like to see more representation that wasn't just, like you said, these very rigid stereotypes that are not, I just like to see normal neurodiverse people in stuff talking about their everyday stuff. Like, why can't we have that?
Well, and one of the shittiest aspects of that whole ADHD iceberg is that a lot of us that have the anxiety about, the procrastinating and how all of that just fills us with dread as we're going through the process. We all somehow are also blessed with like perfectionism most of the time. So even
my God, I don't know if it's a blessing or not, though.
Not at all. No, you'll get done and you'll look back at it and go, well, this is complete shit. Why would anybody care? I misspoke once, so why would I release this entire video, for example? There's
my God.
running a YouTube channel, there's probably 5 times I've recorded a video 3 or 4 times and gone, you know what? It probably is going to suck anyway, and just straight deleted them all, and they've never seen the light of day.
Oh my God.
It sucks to have us go through that and look down on ourselves when in all reality, it's just a part of our neurodiversity.
I've scrapped like half commentary before. I've scrapped like whole essays and just written them again, like entirely. Got to the end of the booklet essay, like it's due the next day. Oh my God, I don't like this essay. And I'm emailing the producer going, sorry, I'm just rewriting the whole essay now. They're all used to me by now, but I often wonder, what the hell do they think? I've just completely re-recorded this now. I don't like it. And there is that perfectionism, I think, that like perfectionism, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because it can, in my own like professional work, I've had to learn to just let go of certain things and move on, because it took me like 3 years to write my first book. It's a tiny book, but I spent like 2 of those years stressing over deleting large chunks of it. And like, I couldn't believe it once I'd finished it. And then I sent it in. I was like, oh my God, that was shit. It was like the shittest thing.
Well, maybe the first step to this film that you're talking about is your podcast. You want to share with everybody what your podcast is?
Not that many disc collectors, but I did just start a podcast called ADHD Wild Women, which is not just about neurodiversity. I didn't want to just do self-help, because there is quite a lot of very good quality self-help there. How to ADHD is an amazing channel. There's some really, really good stuff on YouTube, especially, and it's all free. So I didn't want to do that, because I thought, like, well, everyone's doing that. I wanted to talk about how like ADHD really is like incompatible with traditional femininity. So, we're always too much or too little of something. We go against that whole stereotype. We're definitely not fucking passive. But I wanted to sort of explore that, and also other aspects of ADHD as well. So I just did episode 2, and that was just all about diagnosis. And how following diagnosis you can have like a period of grief, or it can be like a difficult period where you are, like you said, like taking these steps into this new life. Like, who am I? I'm like this new person. But the first episode was about, I used the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, which I absolutely love, and I use a lot in my film work. And it's weird how it's all connected, and it's all been leading to this thing now. I can look back and see how it started to sort of get more into my film work. And I got to the point where I thought, well, I need to do both now. This is outgrown the film thing. And so I use that to just really talk about that, this idea of being wild and how that's unacceptable. And so, because I want to be out and I want to talk about this. I am a successful film writer and I've done all this stuff, and people look at me and they go, oh my God, you've done all this stuff. But it's like, it's been the best 10 years of my life and the fucking worst 10 years of my life. You know, last time I was on, we talked
Yep.
about imposters. Like every single thing I've had to fight for, the perfectionism, the procrastination, just the sheer and I wanted to be realistic about that because I know a lot of other writers struggle with this. A lot of writers are neurodiverse. That's why we end up writing, you know, because
Absolutely.
we have to communicate or we end up doing podcasts or YouTube, you know. And I thought I want to start being honest about this. I don't want to hide it away. And I find the more I talk about it, the more people, like I mentioned it to you, because I mentioned it to everyone. And then you tell me you've been diagnosed. And, you know, I think it's important that we talk about that. I think that's where we then start finding our representation is in identifying each other. And there are a lot of us in this community. And I don't know about people watching this video, but I put money on people watching this video and neurodiverse.
Oh yeah.
Even the aspect of film collecting, I meet so many people on the spectrum within
It's
that
obsession.
world. Yeah. Because it's, you know, it is part of their fixation and, you know, all the trivia and everything. So I meet so many people on the spectrum through that.
Right.
And like you said, that's not reflected in the media, or you get the quote unquote nerd stereotype, which again isn't very helpful. It's not very helpful at all. I guess you do get that. I never watched that Big Bang Theory, but you get that kind of nerdy computer or
It's not a good one.
Gareth from The Office. Yeah, so it's not, you know, it's not flattering. It's like, why can't we have the neurodiverse person? Well, I guess Kim and Saul are an exception to that, even though they're kind of naughty, but they're admirable. I wouldn't say they were bad characters, but yeah, when do we get the one, you know, where the ADHD or the autistic person does this like really great thing after procrastinating for 2 weeks, having a nervous breakdown in their bedroom? Where do we get the film about that?
Yeah, and we get a label on it and told that this is a plot point, that they're struggling with this and that, you know, it affects the entire family. It's something that is going to be a part of their life for the rest of their life, and they're trying to, you know, find it within themselves to be able to make that a strength rather than a crutch or something that will hold them back.
I think it's a reflection of society, though, because it's not seen as a strength. You know, because it is kind of counter this capitalistic mindset that we have about productivity, and everything is about wellness and productivity, and you're supposed to even be productive on your day off now, and everything you do, even like wellness journaling and yoga and fucking meditation, and it's toxic because it's all about how can we make ourselves machines. And the biggest step for me was just giving up on that and just saying, hey, I'm never going to be normal. I'm probably never going to have any money, and that's fine. I'm virtually unemployable.
Same.
And I'm just whatever. At this point, I'm not going to make myself more productive because I'm not a machine.
Right.
And I'd worked in supervision. I worked as a bloody area manager. And I was great with the people. I was shit at the paperwork. I was always hiding things I hadn't done and annoying my micromanaging, very sort of organized boss by what he called my chaos, which he couldn't cope with. But I was good at the job. And, you know, but it costs me. Everything costs. It's got an energy cost. And so all the years of stressing and worrying that I've messed up or I didn't do this right, you know, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to be out as who I am. I'm going to tell people. And if they've got an issue with it, whatever, they're not people I want to be around then. And I have found that a lot of people have been very accepting about it. Even like my clients, I'm just I think some of them think it's weird I say that, because I just sort of kind of like, oh, okay then. But I will say that I need a very rigid deadline. I need very particular instructions, because otherwise it's, you know, it's going to drift off. You can't say to me mid-March. That's never happening. Every day is mid-March after the 15th.
Yep. And that's the thing. What can we use to not not mask ourselves and not make us act more neurotypical, but we can find ways to make ourselves more successful knowing that that is a part of our life. So things like using a very rigid calendar app is something that I've had to do even long before my diagnosis. I realized if I don't do this, I'm completely worthless. So I have to use this or I'm just god awful. That and you know, when you first look for something because it's missing, that first place you look for it, that's probably where you should keep it because that's where your mind is going to go. So it's
Well,
just something to
3
set yourself
years
up.
ago, somebody told me, if you have a place where you put your car key, it will always be there. And I was just like, what the so now it has a place, and it's like, oh my God, this is mind blowing to me.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I've had to.
totally that. It was all about the next planner or the next thing. Like even before I got diagnosed, I was always on these like reading self-help groups,
Yeah,
books about, you know, productivity or how to get things done. And what I didn't realize was they don't actually work for neurodiverse people. You need other ways. But I have notebooks and planners. Digital things don't exist to me apart from the Echo, which reminds me of things, and my phone reminds me of things. And even on top of all of that, I'm still some days like, what the hell am I doing?
yep.
Even doing this halfway through talking, I've had a few moments of what was I saying?
Yeah, I've found the digital reminders don't do much because I will snooze them a couple times and
Oh
then they
yeah,
don't
and then they're
exist.
gone. It's just
Yep.
it's noise. So I do like my analog systems, but it is I think it's finding that middle ground of, for me, it's been largely about, okay, I do like being productive, and that
Yeah.
gives me all the dopamine, which my body doesn't produce. I get the biggest dopamine rush over completing stuff. But what I found is it's always much more satisfying is if that's my stuff I wanted to invest time in. So the last couple of years, I've just been really stripping down, like moving away from things that I struggle with, that I'm just not invested in. And that's largely why I went into producing as well, to give myself more time as well for my other projects like my Patreon and stuff, because I love doing commentary, but they're very time
Oh yeah.
intensive. And so when I was doing those, I wasn't having much time for anything else. So I found, like, energy wise, and people think ADHD people are so like, I'm always tired. I don't know about you, but I'm always exhausted. I get out of bed in the morning, I'm just like, so it's like stripping back and being productive in the things that I want to do, setting my own
Right.
goals. And I know I've noticed you're like that with the channel, like you set these goals, and you know, it is the way I think that we do, because we do get stuff done. We get a lot of bloody stuff done.
Oh yeah.
And then you look back and you just think, oh my God, all that stuff that I did. At the
That and
time, it doesn't feel like that.
I look back and go, wait, did I actually do all that? Because I don't remember most of that.
Yeah, because it's like in this days of, oh my God, this is awful. This is the worst
Yep.
thing I've ever done. What am I doing? And it's like, there's no enjoyment in it. I
Yeah,
always
it
want to
gets tough.
tell that to writers, you know, you're not going to enjoy a single minute of this. You get like about 5 seconds once you finish the project, and then fear sets in. It's like terrible.
Right. Wow. Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of people are a lot more neurodiverse than they know. So a lot of these things will ring true with a lot of people that have never been diagnosed, never even consider it, and perhaps that will light the fire and get somebody to find some information out about themselves.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's like with my friend, if they've never said to me, and of course it's obvious.
Right.
I remember when my son got diagnosed in the 90s, and this psychiatrist said to me, "Is anybody else in the family have ADHD?" And I'm just like, "No." Like, it's me. Years later, I go back through the NHS and I see the same flipping psychiatrist. I'm like, "Hello." But it took somebody to say to me, "Have you ever considered that you might have ADHD?"
Right.
And I was totally oblivious until I was like 42, 42, 43. I'm 48 now. And it's weird. You think, how can you be oblivious? But like we've been saying, it's so complex. And it's often not this you know, with my son, he was diagnosed in the 90s. He was very hyperactive. He was very much the kind of very well-known type, or still is, you know, don't outgrow it. And so he was very sporty and he was on the go all the time, and it was all about sports, whereas I'm like a sloth.
Same.
And so it didn't occur to me that that could be it. And then when a friend said, and I went, oh, just check on that on one of them was online things, and it came out like 90% or something. I'm like, oh fuck. I've been
That's
diagnosed
perfect.
twice actually, yeah, because I went private, and then because the NHS waiting list is ridiculous, and then
Right.
I thought that would give me leverage with the NHS, but it didn't. So I then had to go back through it. And yes, weird being diagnosed twice. The second time I was convinced, oh, they'll say it's not again. And they were like, no, you are.
What's sad though is we could talk for probably 6 straight hours about the underutilized areas of behavioral health therapy, of medication, of how the health system has screwed over those that are neurodiverse, has continued to do that, and not to mention nobody puts resources into that. So there
No,
are
there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. And the UK is the worst it's ever been. Like, getting anything for my son, it took 8 years to get him diagnosed.
Yep.
And then after diagnosis, which was during the pandemic, nothing, no support. It's only now he's at college, and they're very, he goes in 4 days a week, but it's quite a drive. But my daughter, who's also ASD and ADHD, went to the same college, and they are very neurodiverse friendly. So I wanted him to go there, and it's only now because he's in this college that are very pro neurodiversity, so they have their own resources, that he's getting all this support. But nothing, there's like nothing. All they offered me was medication or nothing, and I don't actually medicate. I'm not against medication, it's just not for me. But there was like, I said, are there no support groups? Is there no, like, I pay for my own therapy. I have my own ADHD coach, and people think I must be rich, but I'm not. She's actually very reasonable. But it's that or not get my work done. So I think we'll just ship it out. But there's nothing like that that's available, like, to support people. And so I guess as a community, we need to support each other, because we need to support ourselves. I know it sounds awful, but we are kind of on our own.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you happen to be like really loaded and you can go to one of those amazing centers that are dedicated to neurodiverse research, or, you know, you have to be flipping rich to get anywhere near that. I looked at this school when my son was homeschooled, and it was like a private school, which is nuts. You know, I've been on welfare my whole adult life because I could never earn enough. And but I was looking at some way of maybe you could go in like 1 day a week or something, and the price, it was just, even that, even 1 day, it was, and it was frustrating because I was like, well, if we had money, he'd be totally supported in an amazing school, and he'd be given that freedom. And so not only that, you have to navigate through all this other crap as well. Not people just saying, oh, it doesn't exist, but the house service saying it doesn't exist.
And
You
in
know,
the
can you
US,
imagine if they treated people like depression, like they take that very seriously now? They didn't used to take it seriously,
even
but it is
15 years
kind of
ago.
like that now. If they treated people with depression like that now, there would be an outcry.
Yeah.
There would be an absolute outcry about, like, you can't treat people. But this, again, it's a hidden thing. It's in your brain. They just act like, oh no, that doesn't exist. You know, just get an alarm on your phone. They told me to go meditate. They sent me to, like, oh, the local church does meditation and mindfulness. Who the fucking are you on mindfulness?
Most of us that are neurodiverse, we're too much in our minds. That's not the problem.
Exactly. This is what I mean. I don't need mindfulness. Thank you.
Well, and
Kind
to
of
bring it full circle to
assessing everything I'm doing.
the Babadook, that's exactly what we need, is that village to help raise each other up, because we don't have other people that are able to be there. So we got to kind of do it for each other. So if you know, the video resonated, you can leave comments below. I'll be there for sure. Kat has been amazing. I'm just glad to make a friend like you. You've been incredible to talk to, and Stuff like this, it is so fascinating just to find out that there are other people that can validate some of those feelings. So it's just meaningful to talk about. That's one of the biggest things.
No, I know, I get it. And I still feel it now, even 5 years after diagnosis, meeting other people, meeting you. It's like meeting tribe. It's like
Yeah,
all of a sudden you don't have to explain to that other person. And, you know, there are a lot of this, there are a lot of us in this community, and not just people that are with neurodiversity, but people with mental health issues.
yeah,
And, you know, I think especially around horror, it just attracts us as natural outsiders, and we can support each other and we can help each other. I put my podcast up thinking no film people would be interested, and it was weird the feedback that came back.
yeah.
People that I wouldn't have, you know, were like, oh my God, you know, I've been interested in this for a while. And yeah, you don't know until you until you actually come forward. And it can kind of feel scary to do that, but it's worth it. I think it's really worth it.
It truly is, and the podcast has been incredible so far. I can't wait to see what
Thank
else comes
you.
forward, because it's just astonishing to listen to. Link for that will be in the description below. Everybody else, I know it's hard if you are finding yourself in this realm, but again, seek out others that are like you. Talk to me, reach out to anybody else, and find those resources, because that village is out there. There's a lot more of us than you think, but it can be hard to nail down that tribe sometimes. So just share your experiences. That's the biggest thing.
I like that. The village is out there.
Yeah. Kat, thanks for your time. I'll let you get back to the dog and the family that you got for you. Thanks, and hopefully we can talk about something else here soon.
Yes. Thanks for having me.